Welcome to Soul of Travel podcast. Today, I'm very excited to be joined by Casey Hanisko, who has recently launched a new coaching and consulting business. So I feel really excited to be able to talk with you about that, share the transition that's recently happened, and let people know where you're at. And I'm sure they'll be just as excited as I am to know that you're here to start to support women in the adventure and outdoor industry. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to talk with you.
Yes, yeah, I know we met very quickly at ATTA in Switzerland, and we're super excited to have a conversation. And then we've kind of been in this space of waiting and transitioning, which I think has been actually a really exciting space to be. Kind of feel like I can be with you in that moment as you're waiting to see what is the next phase of your journey. So I love that we were able to share that. But Casey, before we get started, I'd love for you to just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about who you are and who you are in the space of travel right now, and then we'll take it from there.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. Well, some people might know me because I was the president of the Adventure Travel Trade Association for about 5 years. And before that, I was vice president, and I also worked at Zagram Expeditions for about 14 years, which is a land and sea expedition company that was very focused on conservation and sort of high-end adventure travel trips. So I've been in the adventure travel space for a really long time. And along that journey, I have spent a lot of time managing people and really also supporting women leaders, which has been really important to me. And so over the past couple of years, as you can imagine, with COVID and just, the struggles that the industry has been in, I really started to just really embrace and dive more into the um, the responsibility of coaching others and helping them become leaders in the industry. And so that was happening while I was at ATTA. And so I have just launched a coaching and consulting business for the adventure travel industry, really focused on women from the coaching perspective, but of course, adventure travel businesses as well overall. So I'm really excited to help people really dive into sort of who they are as a leader, bring their leadership voice to the table, help support people management, which is really sort of needed in the industry right now, as there's a lot of sort of new leaders and managers coming up, and doing storytelling and sustainability work with the industry.
Yeah, thank you so much for walking us through that. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your connection to travel and understand how travel found you or how you found travel. It usually seems like travel finds us and like brings us into this web, but I'd love to hear what that looked like for you.
Oh, that's kind of a crazy story for me. So I mean, usually I start with how I got into the industry, but as a young adult after college, I was a Spanish minor, and so I went to Guatemala and did an immersion program after college, and that was really my first experience outside of the country. I had done a lot of national travel in the U.S., but my grandparents were travelers, so I sort of had this. I knew travel was a possibility and had always been an outdoorsy person because of my family. So we canoed, we hiked, we skied, we did all of those things. Um, anyway, so when I went to Guatemala and Honduras, I was like, just really, really loved the experience, the cultural experience of that. And when I went back home, I decided to move out to Seattle and was in Seattle and working at a bank, which was not my dream job. And so I was volunteering, teaching English as a second language at the Refugee Women's Alliance. And when I was there, I was co-teaching a class with a woman who worked at Zagram Expeditions. And they were starting a space voyage division. and was looking for somebody to support that. And so I decided to interview. And so I got a role at the space voyage department, as you can imagine. I mean, there's a whole story around what is that,
Mhm.
but the gist is that I started there, and I was a program manager. So I was helping sell the suborbital flights to space. And then we got into deep sea. And so I was very much working with clients, but also we were doing a lot of marketing and communications, as you can imagine, because what is space voyages? What does that mean? How do you sell that? It's very exciting and different. And so I really got into the marketing and sort of storytelling side early on in my career because of it was such a unique experience. So after that, my career continued, and it's a long journey from that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And I love kind of hearing and seeing a little bit of the connection to gender equity, and where you were talking about working with the refugees and just kind of layering in these pieces of impact with travel, which like slowly start to become, I think, really important to you as you work in adventure travel and then learn more about conservation and gender equity and how all these pieces come together. And you already mentioned that you have such a dedication to creating a space for women in the industry and supporting them. Is that something that was sparked by a particular incident, or is this something that you think was just inherent in you? I know
Mm.
for myself, like looking back at my journey, I see that it was with me all the way. Even when I was a young child, I could see these moments where I was just this like tiny feminist who was advocating for the voices of women to be heard, like in all these different places. But I wonder for you if that was something that happened as you stepped into roles and saw that you needed support, or there were barriers you were facing on your own, or if that was something that has already been a part of who you are and what you wanted to create.
Hmm. That's a really great question. I actually think it started it started probably when I was younger, in that my mother was not, and still continues to this day to not be like a particularly vocal person. And so in her marriage to my father, she didn't really stand up for herself. So I think that's one of the reasons why now, after so many years, having a strong, believing in your voice and using your voice is incredibly important to me, because my mother did not do that. And so I think over time, reflecting back, that is one of the reasons why it's important. I had to spend a lot of time developing my voice because I did not have that as an example from her. And I had a very loud voice from my father that wasn't necessarily a positive influence. But when I got to college, I took a women's, I don't remember what it was called, but a women's equity class. And it was fascinating to me. It was, it really just opened a lot of doors. I was an English major. And so I had always read a lot of women authors. That was already always important to me. But then I really got into sort of gender equity studies. And so I had that as sort of a base. But I would say, like, within travel, sort of bringing those elements, sort of that thread through. When I started travel, it was men at the top. It was not women. And I think as I went into different companies, I spent a lot of, unusually, I spent a lot of time at, two places really, Zagram and the Adventure Travel Trade Association. And at both of those organizations, it was majority women, I mean, majority men at the top. And it was something that I definitely advocated for change and helped sort of bring more women to the table and um, change that dynamic over time. But as I entered those spaces, it was mostly men, and it was something that I wanted to change because I saw it. It was obvious.
Mhm. Um, I think it's so interesting because for part of my own awareness of this, was the first adventure travel summit that I went to when I was early in my career 20 years ago, I think around there. And And in that moment, I was really gravitating toward a few women that were showing up as leaders in that space. And it was very few. It may have literally been two people.
Mhm.
And I kept, as I started, moving on in my career, and I would keep touching back with these certain people, I would think, what is it about them that I'm admiring? Or what is it about them that I'm kind of emulating? And then what I really realized, it was just the fact that they were there, because they were one of the, some of the only women in leadership roles that I really could emulate and look up to, and seek to aspire to be. And probably a very similar time, I was working at Lindblad Expeditions in Seattle. So, very similar. There was so many male leaders, and not that they weren't also great mentors, but I kept wondering, you know, why aren't women in this space? And because it is adventure travel, and I would hear the stories of these men who were leaders talking about their adventures as young men and how that kind of led them into these roles. I was thinking, well, maybe it's because, women can't lead adventure travel companies, or, I was kind of always asking these questions in the back of my mind. And had such a great moment coming back to the event this year in Switzerland and seeing how many women were present, who are present, how many more women are leading companies or are in leadership roles, and seeing so many more women on the stage, particularly with a really great panel this year, and have watched, you as a leader there bringing more conversations about women. So it's been really interesting to see that evolve in this space. For you, what challenges do you think you have faced in supporting women in the adventure travel space? And do you see any unique opportunities in this market segment for women as well?
Mm. Well, challenges, it had been challenging to, um, it was challenging because we had to be very purposeful about creating change, right? So I think it was maybe 6 years ago, COVID kind of creates this blur of time. Maybe it was 7, where we really started focusing at the ATTA on a women's leadership initiative, and in particular about getting more women speakers on stage, because we would be meeting about content for the events and be thinking, oh, we need to have a session on um, sustain marketing sustainability, or I don't know, branding, or I don't, all the things. And names would start to get thrown out about who could be a speaker. And it was a man, and then it was another man, and then a man. And so you had to stop and really be like, okay, what women can come to the table. And we really had to stop and be purposeful and more thoughtful about it, because they weren't coming to mind as quickly for any of us, women and men in the room doing the thinking about it. And so, so we really had to make more of an effort to bring the women who had the knowledge and had the information forward to share that. And I think it's an interesting study in, like, thinking about why didn't we think about them. Because they're maybe because there were less initially. That definitely has increased, but I think it's more about being prominent, being out there, being, buddies with different men that maybe have been in the industry longer. That kind of effect, rolls on. And so we really had to be purposeful about it. And I think that women as leaders have a really hard time advocating for themselves. There's always a feeling of, I'm not good enough, or I might lack that, or I might not bring enough to the table. And, as a coach, I really, really want to support women in getting beyond that and being enough and recognizing that you have something to say and share. And I think that's really the opportunity, is for more women to really stand in their greatness and in what they offer, and what they offer differently. And I think that there's a lot of women being brave and starting businesses, and doing it. And we need to share that more. I think that there's more, I see more women, I think, offering the future of travel and really like seeing um, what type of needs businesses have. And I think it's interesting because we know that, what is it, like 80% of travel is booked by women. I mean, women are out there making the travel arrangements. They're the ones presenting it to their family, their partner, their friend group, whoever, and saying, this is what is interesting, or these are our options. They're the ones thinking about it. And I think that there's value in being a woman creating a business to present those options to the person buying it. So I think it's going to be fascinating next few years because more women are there and creating these businesses, as you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Two things from that I'd love to talk about. One is the type of businesses that women are creating, as you mentioned, and two is that the kind of mindset as women that we have to overcome to be in those places. And so maybe we'll start with that. But I know I was just interviewing another woman and we were talking about how if there's a job posting, women tend to feel like they need to meet 100% of the criterion and then probably a little bit more before they would apply for a position. And men tend to look at about 50 to 60% of the criterion and then they feel comfortable applying for a position. And so I think, that's just an interesting starting point of how we value, what we have to offer and how willing we are to kind of put ourselves out there and really celebrate our skills and our strengths and our contributions. And then the other thing might be that we also underestimate our value. So we might actually be 100% qualified for that, but for some reason, we're just not kind of giving ourselves the credit to apply. So when you're working with women, how do you help them overcome some of those things, which I think are also social, is a social context in terms of women have been historically told to, be softer, quieter, take up less space, as we're looking at stereotypical roles of women. I think all of those things come into play as we try to take on these leadership roles. What did some of those conversations look like for you?
I think it's often helping women think about, like, let's say there's a job description that talks about, uh, creating processes to, um, like, I don't know, structure and operations for something. And somebody might read that and be like, well, I haven't worked in operations, right? I know that I'm really great at like setting up processes for things, but I haven't done that in operations. Like, having somebody step back and say, well, why are you great about processes? What have you done? Like, tell me more about what that would look like to create a process. What have you done in the past? What are you proud of? Think about the things that you've accomplished and think about how that might translate into this other role, and not stopping the word that, operations, from allowing you to move forward. So to think about, to focus on sort of what accomplishments have been in the past, and then how that can be um, compared to, or sort of morphed into, a possibility. So thinking about the options and the being creative about, like, what does it mean to hold these strengths, and how these strengths can be translated into other opportunities. So that's definitely something that I encourage people to do, is to think about it from what it might be, what the possibilities are, versus, focusing on what the negative is, or what can't happen. And I think that opens up a lot of doors, and to think about how in the past you may have taken a skill and translated it into something else. So thinking about it in a way, like, not thinking about it from work, like, how have you used a work skill maybe in your personal life? Because then somebody can start to think about, like, oh yeah, I'm really good at creating projects at work, and oh, I've had to do that for my, I don't know, for nonprofit I volunteer at too, or from my family life. And oh yeah, I can take that skill and translate it. So I think that sometimes opens up people's minds and creates that sort of more that positivity around it. I forget the other part of your question now.
Oh no, that's okay. No, it's fine. I also just was thinking when you were talking about that, I joke often. I have a master's in event planning, in addition to my other degree in sustainable destination management. And I say like I use that all the time as the like chief chaos coordinator in my home. But it's true if you look at the spreadsheets I have and the amount of tasks I have to juggle and the documents that I have to shift back and forth. And I think because that falls under my, my homemaker hat or my mom hat, it doesn't resonate with me that I am constantly using skills that I had used in that part of my career because it just feels like an obligation to my family. But I do really manage quite a lot of things that I might overlook the fact that I'm continuing to use that. And I think women too re-entering the workforce after being home as a homemaker or a mother for a period of time might feel like they've lost a lot of their skills, but I feel like you're actually really honing. I mean, networking and schedule management and all of these other different things that actually are a professional, you're using your professional skill in your home versus, it not being relatable. And I think that's for me, I know that was one thing that was really daunting is to say that I was still doing work, even though it didn't fall under the context of a professional career.
Right. One thing that I have seen over the last year is a change in job descriptions where they'll actually put a line that says, don't don't stop yourself if you don't meet all of the criteria, which
Mhm.
I think is like it's like, to me, it feels like it's directly written from a diversity and inclusion perspective to really encourage people to, like, if you think that you have something to offer, yet you are afraid that you're not quite enough or have all the skills, apply anyway. And I think that it's a nice way to sort of combat what we're just talking about, to sort of open the door a little bit, like, no,
Mhm.
come in, do it. We want to know about you. And I hope, I don't know how that necessarily translates on the other side of like receiving, because we know that in particular, if we just stick on gender, women or men, if it's like, unfortunately, still, if there's a man's name at the top, their resume gets reviewed, a man's name, my name could be a man's name, but if somebody, perceives it as a man, they just get reviewed differently than a woman. And that's, unfortunately, there's data to back up that happens. And that's unfortunate because there's still a lot of companies that are not creating systems to make that not part of like an interview review process.
Yeah, no, and that's really interesting because early in my career, I also went by Chris. And so the same thing. And I remember actually walking into a room and having people, they're going, oh, I thought I was interviewing a man for this job. And like,
Mhm.
no, I'm just me.
Right.
Sorry to disappoint you. But it is interesting, even in that process. I hadn't thought about that for quite a long time. But the way that people expect to engage with you based on who they think you are. So the other thing that I had been asking was a little bit about the types of businesses that women are creating now in the industry. And I was really fortunate to take part in the first cohort of the Women's Work program, which I think you're probably familiar with. Iris Serbanescu is on the podcast before, and we were talking about what that program entails, but seeing the businesses that women are creating in spaces like that, how different they are from what exists, how focused they are on social impact, gender equity, the culture that they're creating, just the energy that they have it feels very different than what exists. What have you seen in that context, and what do you think is behind that?
Yeah, that's interesting. So I love what Iris is doing, by the way. I worked with her as she was sort of transitioning and creating this business. So I was very like deeply engaged with her work and just so impressed with that program. It's such a great opportunity for emerging entrepreneurs to really get the support that you need, So anybody listening to the podcast should check out women's work. But um, I, I don't have it right at my fingertips. I just finished, what's the name of it? When Women Lead. It's a new book by Julia Bernstein. It's just so wonderful. And it talks about different ways that women lead differently. And so much of that book resonated with me. And some of it was talking about women and social impact, and sort of the often like the empathy that women are bringing to the table as leaders. And it's often because of sort of how we're brought up, and like how we're facing different like barriers along the way. And so as we're creating a business, you bring that with you, and you are thinking about the sort of the effect of what you're building. And so in and you're thinking about the effect on multiple generations, like, if you have children or you have nieces or nephews or whatever the case may be, often you're thinking about this world that is affected by this business that you have started. And so there is more of that sort of social impact that seems to be woven into businesses that women create. And if I think about the like women that have travel businesses, I feel like it's often, there's more sort of like body positive, like I think about Allison who runs Whoa Travel, like she has different trips that are for people who are larger and feel like they might be more challenged or might be perceived as having more challenges in the trips. And she has some great trips that are for specifically for Black people, and whether I think it's for some specific groups she runs trips, which is great. Like she's targeting these different demographics in very specific ways that I think is really interesting. And there's also companies that are, very specifically working with local communities of where they're going and giving back to those communities and making sure that they're, not just, let's say, working with a local artisan when they're there, but they're really purposefully like choosing a woman-owned lodge or going to the local restaurants and just taking more diligent time to do that. Now, will it create more maybe challenges initially, sort of getting started? I'm not sure. I just read Focusrite came out. Was it Focus? I don't know if it was their article. But there's just an article that came out again about the challenges of travelers being in the interest in sustainable travel, and that there's still this like, yes, travelers want sustainable options, but they don't want to pay more for it. And so really, there's this need and want for businesses to do that. But how do you run a business and make money and be a viable business at the same time? And it is a real challenge to start a business and really feel like, how do I have margin? How do I do that? And I think I have no data to back this up, but what I feel like I see is that women are starting with that, just like, I'm going to be thoughtful about this from the get-go and not backtrack and implement it later on. And it'll be interesting to see sort of in a few years how that plays out.
Yeah, I mean, those are definitely conversations I've had a lot, both in women's work, but in general, is how do you take that impact you want to create and still have a business that is, providing you an income as well as anyone else you hire. And when you are in the mindset of creating impact, then sometimes you fall into this thought of, it being philanthropic, and then therefore it should only maybe break even or, not become this scalable business. And like, I feel like that just adds another layer of kind of these things we have to break through in order to have successful businesses if we have that layer. And, speaking really personally, like that is something I've had to come back to over and over again, is that, the impact I want to create is only going to be possible by me scaling and growing my business. And so the business does have to be an important part of the equation. And while I want to, like you said, have the impact from the foundation, I need to think about how those things can work together in order to have success be, sustainable for me and for growth for the people that I want to support. So I think I don't know if that is only pertaining to women. I feel like there's men that own businesses that have similar structures. But then the other thing that I think about is a lot of these businesses are started as these kind of passion projects, or these things that are really personally vetted and really emotionally driven for women in these smaller companies. And then how you do scale, because then you're bringing people into something that means a lot to you, and you're having to find someone that really aligns with your values and wants to grow it the same way. And I wonder if there's different challenges to kind of creating these impact driven businesses because you are so personally invested. Does that make sense? Like, it's not just a business with the objective of making as much money as possible. However we can do that, go. Like, there's this thing that's kind of importantly holding you back. And I think allowing you to see that the endless growth actually isn't your goal, but some growth is your goal. How would you coach women through kind of looking at that, pulling that apart, and figuring out how to, implement growth into their business?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I think that that women need to really embrace that it's okay to run a business and to make money off of a business and be purpose driven at the same time. And so to really be clear about that up front, and I think this is for men and women, really. This is about that passion driven, purpose driven businesses need to make money too in order to be successful. And if you're clear from that at the get-go with anybody that you hire, then it doesn't become a barrier later on. Somebody, won't walk in to the company and, feel like, well, why are we charging a 25% margin, and not understand it. But I think it's all like, there's a big trend towards transparency. And I'd say just start there. Just like, this is the numbers, and we have to build margin in so that we can continue to expand, so that we can have money in the bank that will enable us to hire another person, so that we can, make this vision and goals that we have as an organization. And if part of the vision and the goals of the organization is some of this impact social driven items, then the team working for you and you will still feel like that's important. And part of the goals also could be about them as people. And I think that, you really have to have this, have goals that are across the board, that are about sort of revenue, that are about sort of the impact that you want to have, that are about the team. And everyone is seen, but also the reality of owning a business and what it means is in place and also upfront. No one's surprised. And, it's the reality of owning a business. So that's what I would advise.
Yeah. I wanted to go back to, we were both talking about early in our career and really seeing that we were surrounded by male leaders, masculine energy as leaders,
Mhm.
and talk a little bit about what it means to be a woman who is a feminine leader. So I think, we both were in a space where if we put ourselves into those positions, we would see that we would be emulating that masculine energy. And I think that is also sometimes something that gets in the way of women actually being very successful leaders, is because they're kind of disregarding that part of themselves, or they're trying to step into a leadership role as someone who they are not. And what can that mean for actually bringing kind of that fuller version of yourself into those leadership roles?
Right. I have so much to say about that. I have a story that comes to mind that I'll probably write about one day, it's just short, but when I was early on at the ATTA, there was 6 other sort of men so it was me, and 6 men that were sort of part of the leadership group. And I have a very vivid memory of, we were in Switzerland. This was the first summit that we had in Switzerland. So this was about 10 years ago. And we were sitting around a table talking, and one by one, they were telling fight stories about how they like were in fights when they were kids, or fights in college, or whatever. I was just sitting there like, I have nothing to share. This is like, I never punched anybody. Like, I have no aggressive fight stories to share. Just sort of observing, kind of, in retrospect, like not feeling included because I had no stories to share. This was not me. This was not, but if you think about that, like stories about like aggression and like protection, and so I bring it up because it's almost like that little bit of that that you sort of like when you think about male leadership, like that battle, the fight. And I do think I've really have gone on a journey of really, especially over the last probably 5-6 years, really purposefully learning to not show up in a way that is more sort of typical male leadership. And really, for me, it's more about being more vulnerable and sharing more vulnerable stories that sort of show that you're a whole person. Over the last few years at the ATTA, I had cancer in 2019, and it's something that like I shared with the team. I didn't sort of hold it back because it was a big thing in my life. Like I had to go through that, and I struggled. And then over COVID, I had a lot of mental health challenges with my children, and it was really hard. And I would share that with the team because I knew the team was going through different things of their own. So I was trying to show up as a whole person, a vulnerable whole person, so that they could also and feel comfortable doing that. And so they knew I had empathy for them, right? And I think for me, there's more, women tend to show up more with more curiosity. We tend to be more collaborative. I'm definitely a collaborative leader, and I will come in and I will make decisions, but I want to hear other people's perspectives in order to inform going forward, because I don't believe that I have all the answers. And yes, I may need to make a decision, and it might not be what somebody else wants or thinks. But at least they feel heard. They know that I've listened to them. So I think for me, those are the types of like, I think that's really where leadership is going anyway. And I think it embodies a lot of what women naturally will bring more to the table. Men do too. So this is, again, like men, there's many men that have some of these characteristics, or they're developing them or realizing it's okay to have them.
Mhm.
And I just think that they're so important to the future of leadership. And I think that opens up so many possibilities for women, because I think women are great leaders. And if more of us are leading companies or at the table, it's going to be positive for the future of the planet.
Yeah. No, and I think it's so important to realize too, like you said, that we're speaking about both men and women as leaders, and like having a balance of masculine energy and feminine energy is important for everyone, because it does allow you to be, fully yourself and engaged as a human at work. I've also had a few conversations around, there's been this notion for a long time that you're an employee at work and a human outside of work. And what we're really looking for is that people should be able to be their full person where they are. And as you were speaking too, I was even thinking about, some instances where I felt like even my husband could not show up as a father at work, right? Very much like we cannot be often a mother at work. Like when you're at work, that's the priority, and that's where a lot of conflict comes in. But I see that there as well. And then also reminded when I was just leading a tour in Alaska, and we were kind of reflecting on the experience. And one of the women said to me, had this realization about you as a leader, and that I expected you to be a leader who told me what I should do and how I should do it. And what I realized is that you're a leader who lets me learn what I can do and how I can do it. And
Mhm.
for me, I was like, wow, that's such a beautiful compliment, because that's what I want to create. But I think that's a really important, you know, shift and a really important contrast to look at, because I think then that really allows the people you're working with to be their most valuable, contribute in the most valuable way. Because if you put this lid on them, well, they're just going to stay there. But if
Right.
you just say, like, here's the space for you to grow in, I think you're going to have so much more value and growth from that person.
Right. Yeah, I totally believe in that. That has been so important to me over the years, is to really like see the people who I work with, see what they bring to the table, what help them help them see themselves too, and to believe in themselves. And also for me, it has been like to for me to be accountable to our conversations, right? Like to support them, or to follow through on the things that I say that I'll do that will help them move forward, or to remove barriers. And I think as a leader, it's incredibly important to bring that to the table. You have to take action on what you say. You can't just talk about things. You can't just blah blah blah. Like, you need to do what you say you're going to do, or communicate about it. And I think those are really important threads that I've seen get lost, or for really challenge people in companies. And I think, if to me, that's incredibly important, to be a good communicator and a good listener, and to take action. And I think women do that. And I want to just comment on what you said about your husband. I, men have a really hard, it's really hard to show up as a parent for men, even, because it's their challenge is that it's even less like expected of them to show up as a whole person in that way. And how devastating is that? So there's a whole other side of things. Yes, women, maybe we don't get as many opportunities. We get sort of, our career gets challenged more because we tend to take on more of the caretaking responsibilities. But men, emotionally, and sort of where they show up, I think they have a harder time showing up as parents. And so there's challenges all around from that
Mhm.
side.
Yeah. And I hope that as we continue to kind of break down that issue from the perspective of a woman's experience, that maybe it will also kind of bleed into it being something more universal, that, really understanding that, we'll have more successful and thriving businesses if we're addressing those needs for all of our, all of the people that work within in a business. And one of the things that I always kind of dreamed of as I was growing my business was the idea of being able to offer like a CEO or a CFO role as a part-time role or as a job share role, so that you can look at, because I had many, women when I was home for a few years with my daughters who had left those roles, and they just knew they could never go back to them if they wanted to prioritize their time with their children. And I was thinking, how they are losing such a valuable employee because they want them there 40 to 60 hours a week instead of 20 to 30 hours a week. And just thinking, like, some of those things, it will be interesting to see if any of those shifts happen. I know they're happening in some places, but if that can become more of a norm and less of an outlier in terms of even how we're looking at staffing and bringing people into the workspace.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I know there's some companies that are doing that sort of, sort of sourcing of people who then can offer those types of like fractional roles. And I think we're going through an evolution. Now we're sort of, there's so much struggle about like hybrid work and remote work, and where is that all going to shake out? That's sort of like the big step in flexibility and sort of what's next. And I think what you said is coming to.
Yeah. Well, I would love for us to spend a little bit more time talking about gender equity in tourism, and specifically kind of looking at how sustainability and gender equity are interwoven. I know that's something that you're also really passionate about, and trying to create an understanding around the how those two things work together. Can you share a little bit about what you have seen, in your role at ATTA, but just in general in the industry, about the impact that is created when you're investing in women in the supply chain through the tourism industry?
Yeah, I mean, it really just starting locally is really what I think has the most impact, is because there is clear evidence that women who own businesses, especially just thinking about like a smaller, like a restaurant or an artisan shop, that the money that um, is created there is more naturally than reinvested in that community, is invested in the children, is invested in local conservation efforts. It's more, there's evidence that the women are more likely to sort of reinvest it where they are. So, sort of starting there and purposefully creating opportunities where maybe you're hiring women guides, or you're looking for that restaurant that's owned by a woman, or whatever the case may be. um, that's going to have such an amazing impact, and that then sort of like trickling that up to depending on where you are and sort of in the travel supply chain. But hiring, if you're hiring a guide to go to a local place, or you're hiring women within your organization, um, you can have that sort of like overall effect. But when you think about sustainability, and you think about carrying on and into the future, it's really just thinking about that the community that you're going to, the place. I think if that can be the focus of the work, and thinking about again, it's this point of like, is it really going to be more expensive to say book at a woman owned hotel versus a male owned hotel? Probably not. So book with a woman owned hotel. There's gonna be a difference made there. And not to not book at the male owned hotel. Like, I don't want, like, if somebody listening to this think that that's not the case, but if you like think about the mix, right? And if you think about putting more purposeful effort into supporting more women owned businesses, that is going to help more in the long run, because it's going to raise up more women in those destinations. So for me, that's the big focus. And also, if there are so many tourism businesses put educational effort into educating their travelers about the places that they're going to, or supporting local conservation efforts, or local putting donating money to sort of nonprofits or organizations. Again, if that can be thoughtfully done, or educated as opportunities for travelers who want to perhaps make a difference in the place that they've just been, that can have a lot of like ongoing impact, because it's something that then gets not just sort of educated or transmitted to those travelers, but it's that amplifying effect of like the knowledge that they have, and then who do they share it with, um, or the ongoing, say they might, let's say, travel to Baja, Mexico, and they see an organization that really resonates with them. They may support that organization for the next 5 years, or they might continue to go back there, maybe not with your tour company, but they may go back there on their own, or develop a relationship with someone there. And who knows what kind of sort of develops from that. So for me, it's really like the biggest sort of effect is that sort of local support.
Mhm. And I think too, you mentioned the educational aspect of it, and And even, if for some reason in an area you don't find a women owned hotel to support, you've done your research and there isn't something there, then maybe part of that conversation you're having with your travelers might be, we really tried to support women owned businesses in this area and didn't find that the infrastructure was in place for that to happen. So here's some of the cultural barriers that women have to owning businesses in the area. And so then I think, as travelers, those are things that we don't often think about. We might think about it in our own lives, in our own daily lives, but as we're traveling, sometimes that stuff can fall off. It won't be something we're as present to. And for me, I think much like you were saying, where people might return to an area or support a cause that they become connected to, that awareness for them might allow them to be a person that becomes engaged in the problem solving
Right.
of that issue in an area as well. And I think we're sometimes just hesitant to talk about those issues in the context of travel or with our travelers, because tourism has so often been painted as a leisure activity where you can dismiss the hard conversations. And I think also a shift that we're seeing, and especially that I'm seeing in the context of women owned businesses, is that we're saying those conversations are a part of your travel experience.
Yeah. Well, and I think they make them richer, right? You almost like when you're in a destination, you're looking a little deeper, right? It's not so surface level.
Mhm.
And I think that that has a more of a deeper emotional impact. And when we were talking about the different um, businesses that sort of women are creating, I think that there's more of these very um, purposeful and mindful businesses that there's more thought going into it, and you're in a place, and it's not only being more thoughtful about the people around you, but also your own experience in the moment, and what are you feeling and thinking and needing and wanting to carry away. I think that there's a lot of sort of mental health. It's not just like it's like mental health care, right? And it's like purposeful soul. Speaking of your podcast, it's like
Mhm.
it's thoughtfulness for your spirit, right? That really I think is needed. People need that, and they're traveling not just maybe for activating their bodies or to on a like an adventure and a bike trip or for like fun, but I think that there's this care of your spirit that is needed, and it's internal, but it's also who you're connecting with, what community you're in when you do that. I think there's a lot to that, and if you can be brave enough to have harder conversations and more thoughtful conversations, and it benefits everyone, even though it might be hard.
Yeah. And I feel like, so, I mean, and again, this is the experience I have of conversations, but so many women I know are cultivating that space because that has been the thing that's been most impactful and resonant for them. And they want, much like, I say this all the time, I just want my travelers to have a moment of that kind of deep, meaningful, intentional connection, and also like personal awareness that happens. Just there's these magical moments, and that's what I want them to have and to share and to experience. And I think women are really good at creating the space for that to happen. And I think, and then also like you said, kind of nurturing what has to happen after you have that, because that powerful experience on its own is powerful. But I think we inherently will compartmentalize that experience if it was too much, or we won't know how to integrate it. And so then creating that place for conversation afterward, after we travel, to like have a community to reflect upon the experience is important. And I think a lot of businesses are really focusing on that aspect as well.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Well, before we end the conversation, I did want to talk a little bit more about your business that you launched and coaching. And before we got on this call, we were talking about, I mentioned some of the really valuable experience I've had being coached and mentored, and how, compared to even my education from my bachelor's and my master's, which were great, not as valuable to who I am in my business right now. And that I think that coaching is tremendously valuable, and to be able to tap into your years of expertise and all of the leadership roles that you've had and be able to learn from you, I think it's really important. How do you think that the space of coaching is really going to support growth of women in this industry?
Well, what I really hope is, and I've seen this with a couple of people that I've coached, is that my focus is to help people really embrace who they are as leaders, and to really sort of bring that to make their business successful and to make the people who work for them as successful as they are. And so it's really being a great leader. But what I found is that there's been this question of, well, but is it like life coaching? And I'm like, well, it's the reality is you're a whole person, right? So it often like starts with like, there's some things to kind of dig through and figure out, and um, to discover and explore and solve, and then bringing that into your leadership. And so I really think that if people, an example, if people can embrace coaching and see that as this is a confidential, you know, conversation. This is my person who I can just be open with, who I can share my fears and my ideas, and there's no judgment, and they can hold me accountable, but also it's okay if I don't come through. Like there's something very, very precious about that. And I've had coaches too. And, one of the things that I really learned from one of my coaches was it really enabled me to bridge that, like my personal interest in writing and poetry and my leadership work. And one of the things that she said to me is, why do they have to be separate? And I was really thinking about them as separate things. And she's like, why do you separate those in your mind? Those can be together. And it just opened up a whole new world for me. And there's moments like that, I think, in coaching where something switches and it changes your life. Like it's a different person's perspective, and holding that sort of brave space for you is I think I've had several coaches, and it just really has always made such an impact on me. And coaching people at the organizations that I've worked for, there's also just been these moments of like helping them become the type of leader that they want to be, and to helping them like learn how to be a people manager. And there's different levels of like what people need, but it all sort of starts with like feeling grounded in who you are and what you have to offer. And so I'm excited to be able to bring my experience to the table for people, but really to um, be there to listen and to help people be creative and curious about themselves.
Mhm. I just had a conversation last week with a woman, and we were talking about how your entrepreneur journey is really your personal growth journey. And, kind of like you said, you're going to actually have to start with who you are to really to grow as a leader. And I even am thinking in my own experience, I'm redoing a SWOT analysis and some, looking at my target market. And as I look at it now, I'm like, I really need to go back to some mindset work first, because I'm finding that I actually can't do this because I have this own emotional barrier with my resistance to XYZ. But
Mm.
I've done it enough now that I can see that's why I'm not completing something. And I think, we have been we've been instructed that these things are often separate, but we really do need to understand how we are a part of our businesses and how that is going to create our own barriers to success. Because if we have an issue with one thing as a person, we're going to take that right with us into our business. And I think that is, like you mentioned, something that in the context of coaching is so powerful that you wouldn't maybe get in business school, although it's been years since I've been there. So I don't know, maybe they're wise and they're integrating some of this into
Mhm.
it, but, really starting with you and then going into, your business. I think it's really important to have all of these aspects, and a coach can see that because they're spending so much time with you, really knowing who you are, what your motivations are, what you're looking to create, and then some of this stuff starts to kind of show itself, and then you can move through it in order to advance.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Well, Casey, thank you so much for this conversation. Before we end our call, I just have a few rapid fire questions, and then we will wrap up. I know the high pressure rapid fire, they're rapid fire-ish, so you don't have to worry if you don't have a succinct answer. But the first question, and we've talked a little bit about this already, but what are you reading right now?
I I just, let's see, what am I reading? I just finished Lessons in Chemistry. Such a good book. Kind of the main character is such a badass woman, so I highly recommend it. My gosh, I read so many books and I don't know off the top of my head what I'm reading. I just finished, what else did I just read? Well, I'll just say I just finished that. I'm looking through my like stack of books to find my next one. So
Yeah, that's great. You're in transition. I have piles of books everywhere, and I'm always listening to one, reading one in like a book form, and reading one in Kindle form. So I feel your dilemma there.
oh, you know what? I am reading one. What's the name of it? It's called What's Up with White Women. So it's like a book about DEI, and I'm reading it with a friend. And so we're reading sets of chapters together and talking about that book along the way. So that's sort of I usually have like a nonfiction one going and then a fiction one going at the same time.
What is always in your suitcase or backpack when you travel?
Ooh. Melatonin.
Very important.
And a Starbucks via, so that I can doctor up a coffee to just be exactly what I need it to be. So I usually have like a little kit, and really comfy socks that like are only for like where I'm like cuddling up, and a book. Those are some things I always bring
Yeah.
in whatever form, whether it's on my phone or like a physical book.
I love that you mentioned the kind of like sleep and awake, because as a traveler, these are the two things that when you're a professional, you really have to find the balance. And I remember the first time I traveled with a whole group of people that were, CEOs of travel companies, and watching their rituals for like a transatlantic flight. I feel like I learned the most about anything I needed to know in the industry was from those moments of being like, here's how you like manage this and can still function when you land wherever you have to land, and be who you are next.
Yeah, it's like an ibuprofen, Starbucks via melatonin sort of blend.
Yeah. To sojourn is to travel somewhere as if you live there for a short while. Where is a place that you would still love to sojourn?
I really want to go to Colombia. That is a dream of mine to go there. I was just talking to my husband about that. I've always wanted to inhabit, so Colombia.
Yeah. What do you eat that immediately connects you to a place that you've been?
Mm. 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 Sometimes if I have really good like feta and tomatoes and like Kalamata olives and like the right olive oil, it brings me back to Turkey for some, like, because the food when I was in Turkey many years ago was so amazing, like it so delicious. And so sometimes if it's just fresh enough and crisp enough and perfect, then I think about being there.
Who was the person that inspired or encouraged you to set out and explore the world?
Mm. I guess probably my mom, because after my parents' divorce, she got certified to scuba dive, and then she started diving in different sort of Caribbean locations. And because her parents were the ones, my grandparents, who also traveled. So I would say that sort of side of my family sort of inspired more of the travel bug in me.
If you could take an adventure with one person, fictional or real, alive or past, who would it be?
Um, oh, I don't know. Oh man, the real person. You know, um, this is gonna, it would be my daughter. Right now, I mean, my daughter is almost 17, and it would be really fun for me. She loves food. She really wants to go to Greece. And I know it's like, I probably should mention some celebrity or somebody important, but I'm not doing shoulds. My daughter came to mind. Of course, like I thought about Michelle Obama, and like then I thought about Amelia Earhart. So those were like some other ones that came to mind, but I'm going to say my daughter.
Yeah. I just had this realization. My oldest daughter just turned 13 and she's doing dance competitions right now, but we get to spend long weekends together in a hotel and we go out to eat and we have these moments. And a couple weekends ago, I was like, I love being with you. I love spending this time with you. And we went to New York and we had the greatest time. And I feel like it's really cool to have a moment where that actually is the person you want to spend time with. I think that's important. And I'm getting ready to travel with my 3 girls for a year. So that's who I will be adventuring with. Maybe you and your daughter can join us at some point, but I think that's really important to travel with your children. It's really memorable for them.
And I should mention my son would be great to travel with too. Also, but my daughter's a little older and more like talking about wanting to do travel. So just in case he ever listens to this podcast, I'm not leaving you out, Theo. You have a different travel bug that, anyway.
Yeah, that would be like my little girl, and she went through the whole England travel guide in preparation for this trip. And I said, where do you want to do in England? What do you want to do? And she's like, I found this bagel shop in London, and that's what I want to do. I'm like, okay, it's crazy. So she has a different concept of travel as well. The last one is solo travel is for elevating the voices of women in this industry. Who is one woman that you admire and would love to recognize in this space?
Mo Carrick has been an important woman in my life. I've known her when I was at Zagram and obviously all through the Adventure Travel Trade Association. I think she's been an amazing mentor to me, and I've learned so much from her as a leader. And I think she's really special, and she's really educated a lot of women in the space and made a big difference.
Yeah. Interestingly, she's one of those very first 2 people that I refer to in my mental mind as the women I'm looking up to. And it's from my first ATTA conference experience. So I love that we have that connection. So thank you for bringing her into the space. So glad that we were able to have this conversation and talk about all these things that you're so passionate about. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much.